The first thing Adrian Cole said when he saw the transfer was, "I never gave you those shares." He was standing behind the desk in his executive office, still wearing the charcoal suit he'd had on at dinner, when he finally said what he apparently believed about me. That I had stayed because being attached to the Cole name opened doors. That I liked the apartment, the invitations, the access. That maybe I loved him, sure, but not enough to walk away from everything that came with him. So I had gone home, opened my laptop, and started removing the one thing he could point to and call proof. "I know," I said. Adrian looked back at the screen. The transfer authorization was still open between us, my electronic signature already attached. I had instructed the administrator to surrender my entire minority stake under the plan's withdrawal provisions. Under those provisions, the units would return to the plan and disappear from my ownership balance. I would receive no cash payout, no replacement grant, nothing back. It wasn't symbolic money. At their current value, those shares represented more than I had earned in salary over several years. Adrian understood that immediately. He understood numbers faster than most people understood tone. "Cancel it." His voice had the smooth, precise edge he used when a meeting was going somewhere he didn't like. No, his eyes lifted to mine. Adrian was an alpha who could stop a room simply by deciding he was done listening. And as CEO of Cole Meridian, people usually treated that silence like an instruction. I had once found the habit annoyingly attractive. Tonight, it only reminded me how often everyone around him confused authority with truth. "Noah, this is an irrational response to an argument." There it was. Corporate language. We had been together long enough that I knew exactly when Adrian started hiding inside it. "Good," I said. For a second, I was worried you might call it an emotional overcorrection with unfavorable tax implications. His mouth tightened. On another night, he might have almost smiled. "This isn't funny. I'm not trying to be funny." I turned the laptop toward him. "You think I stayed because your name made my life easier. Fine. I can't return your last name because I never took it. I can't return the invitations because most of them were terrible. But I can remove this." Adrian came around the desk, then stopped before reaching for the computer. That hesitation registered because 6 months ago, he would have simply taken it from me, fixed whatever he thought I was doing wrong, and handed it back once the problem had disappeared. "How much?" he asked. I told him. Something changed in his face. Not panic. Adrian did not panic, but his attention sharpened in a way that told me the number had crossed from dramatic gesture into actual consequence. "You're giving up that much because of something I said over dinner?" "No," my voice stayed level, which was more effort than I wanted him to know. "I'm giving it up because you finally told me what you think all the years before dinner meant." That landed. He looked away first. For 1 second, I remembered another version of us. Adrian asleep on my couch with a quarterly report on his chest because he had refused to leave while I had the flu, his expensive watch hanging halfway off his wrist, a bowl of soup cooling untouched beside him. I had thought moments like that meant we knew each other beyond the obvious things. I had been wrong about at least one of us. Adrian turned back to the screen. "Where did you get them?" "The shares." "Yes, Noah." His control slipped just enough to make my name sound personal instead of procedural. "If I didn't authorize a grant, who did?" I almost answered. Then I realized I didn't know why he was asking the question that way. Not how I had earned them. Who had given them to me? As if ownership in his company still had to pass through a more important person's hand before it could reach mine. "You really don't know?" I said. Adrian's jaw shifted. "Apparently not." The word should have satisfied me. For years, I had let results speak because I believed competent work eventually made its own argument. When a product division recovered, I never cared whose name got repeated in the board summary. When a strategy one built became company policy, I told myself Adrian knew what I had contributed even if nobody else did. I had never asked him to say it. I had certainly never asked him to reward me for it. Maybe that had been my mistake. I closed the laptop before he could study the file again. "The transfer is already with the plan administrator." "Then I'll call legal. If you interfere with it, you prove my point for me." He went still. The pressure in the room changed, not because his alpha instincts suddenly became dramatic, but because Adrian Cole had just encountered a problem his authority could make worse. His phone was already in his hand. Slowly, he put it back on the desk. That was the first thing he did all night that surprised me. "All right," he said. "I won't stop it." I nodded, picked up my coat, and headed for the door. Behind me, a notification sounded from the laptop. Adrian looked at the updated ownership record before I did. "Noah." This time there was no CEO voice left in him. I turned. He was staring at the earliest entry in my equity history, dated years before the night he had first brought me to a Cole Meridian event as his partner. Whatever he had expected to find there, it wasn't that. These started vesting before us, he said quietly. I met his eyes. Yes. And for the first time since he accused me of staying for his name, Adrian looked less certain about why I had stayed than about how little he understood the man who had. By 9 the next morning, returning the shares had become a company problem. The email from Cole Meridian's equity administrator was waiting when I opened my laptop. My surrender request had crossed the threshold for an internal ownership review, which meant the company had to confirm how the stake had been acquired before it could be removed from my account. Under normal circumstances, that would have been paperwork. My circumstances were no longer normal. A second message arrived 20 minutes later from compliance asking me to attend a review that afternoon because my relationship with Adrian created a potential conflict of interest question around prior grants. I had spent years avoiding exactly this. I never let Adrian negotiate my compensation, push a promotion, or open a door I could earn my way through myself. By lunch, legal was already asking whether any of my equity had been executive-sponsored. When the doors opened on the executive floor, Adrian was waiting outside the small conference room with his phone in one hand and the expression he wore when he wanted to reorganize a system that had disappointed him. I told them to suspend the review until we understand the exposure, he said. I stopped walking. You told them what? Not the transfer. The review. Adrian. Noah, compliance sees my name attached to yours, and now they're treating every grant you've ever received like a possible related party benefit. I'm not letting that happen. His voice was controlled, almost reasonable, which somehow made it worse. You don't get to solve the problem by demonstrating that the CEO can make compliance stop asking questions about me. The muscles along his jaw tightened. I'm trying to protect you. Then don't make me look protected. That got through. Not all the way, but enough that his eyes shifted toward the conference room door instead of his phone. For years, Adrian's instinct had been simple. Identify the problem, apply authority, remove obstacle. It was one of the reasons Cole Meridian had survived 3 brutal market years without gutting half its workforce. It was also the reason being loved by him could sometimes feel suspiciously similar to being managed by him. If this turns into a formal review, he said, quieter now, people will start asking whether you benefited from our relationship. They're already asking. Which is exactly why I should. He stopped himself. I waited. Adrian looked at the phone in his hand, then locked the screen. What do you want me to do? It was such a small sentence that I almost missed what had changed. He had asked. Nothing unless they ask you directly, I said. And if they do, tell the truth. You never gave me the shares. You never arranged them. You never negotiated them. His gaze held mine. I didn't. Then let the records say the rest. Inside, a compensation analyst and HR representative pulled up the timeline of my ownership history. My stake hadn't appeared all at once. It had built slowly across different roles and performance cycles. These aren't executive discretionary grants, the analyst said, tapping one line. Adrian, seated across from me, looked up. What category? Employee performance participation. She moved down the record. Several tranches. Different qualification dates. Adrian glanced at me, but I kept my attention on the screen. The distinction mattered. This was not equity Adrian could have handed me behind a closed door. The analyst opened the first record, then frowned slightly. This one predates the declared relationship by nearly a year. Adrian's expression didn't change, but I knew him well enough to see the calculation beginning behind his eyes. Compliance moved to the next entry. That one came later, after Adrian and I had already started seeing each other privately. My stomach tightened. There it was, the kind of timing someone could point at if they wanted a simpler story. CEO dates employee. Employee gets more equity. Nothing suspicious had to happen for the sequence to look suspicious. Who approved this tranche? Adrian asked. The analyst checked the record. Not a person. It was triggered by a performance pool. His eyebrows drew together. Which pool? Strategic value retention. Automatic qualification once the underlying metric cleared the threshold. I remembered the work attached to that quarter. 6 months rebuilding a product strategy everyone else had wanted to abandon until the division started growing again. Adrian had known about the turnaround. I had assumed he understood what I had done. The supporting record put my name beside the project, the performance score, and the formula that had triggered eligibility. No executive sponsor. No exception. No Adrian Cole. His attention stayed on the screen long after the analyst finished explaining it. So the company awarded this because the metric was met, he said. Correct. And my office had no role. None that I can see. For once, Adrian had no immediate response. The review had started because people wondered whether his name had given me ownership. The records were showing the opposite, that ownership had been accumulating whenever my work created measurable value on its own. The next record made Adrian stop looking at me like my shares were the mystery and start looking at the company like it had been keeping score without him. The compensation analyst opened another performance tranche, this one from 18 months after the first, and a familiar project code appeared beside my name. I knew it immediately. Meridian Loop. Adrian knew it too. That was the retention platform, he said. The one we nearly killed. Twice, I added. The supporting page tied my employee number to customer recovery, operating margin, and 12-month revenue retention. All three had cleared the ownership plan threshold automatically. Who submitted Reyes as the project lead? Adrian asked. Operations Analytics, the analyst said. The attribution came from the project system, not an executive nomination. That should have felt good. Instead, something cold settled under my ribs. Adrian had known Meridian Loop was mine. He had watched me spend 6 months dragging it back from a shutdown recommendation. He had called me at 11 at night to argue over rollout sequencing, then sent coffee to my team the next morning because he knew none of us had gone home. He knew the work. What he apparently had never known was that the company had valued it enough to give me ownership. The HR representative flagged one later award because it posted after we disclosed our relationship. Adrian asked whether the criteria had changed or my score had been adjusted. Neither had. Then don't describe timing as evidence of influence, he said. Yesterday, he would have tried to stop the review. Today, he let it continue while refusing to let an assumption become a fact. That sounded dangerously close to restraint. I said, I'm learning new hobbies. The next file was a strategy memo I had written in my old apartment before Adrian and I had ever spent a night together. My name was on the original draft. The final recommendation had been adopted almost word for word, but by the time it became company policy, the announcement called it a leadership initiative. I had convinced myself I didn't care. Adrian read the creation date twice. You wrote this. I turned toward him. You approved it. I approved the final operating plan, which contained this. His eyes stayed on the document. I didn't know it started with you. The sentence hurt in a different way than his accusation had. There was no cruelty in it. That was the problem. Adrian wasn't confessing that he had taken credit from me. He was admitting that my work had reached him after enough layers of management had stripped my name from it. And because I had been beside him personally, he had never thought to ask where the value began. The contribution history showed a pattern bigger than the shares, project ownership, performance credits, cross-functional recommendations. My work had been climbing through Cole Meridian for years, often losing my name before it reached the top floor. Adrian sat back slowly. Why didn't you ever tell me? I looked at him. About which part? That I was doing my job. That you were responsible for this much of it. The old instinct rose in me. Give him the dates, the documents, the clean factual answer. Let the evidence do the embarrassing work of explaining my worth. I stopped myself. Because I thought you knew. Adrian's face changed. Barely, but enough. The analyst returned to the earliest qualifying period. The first grant came from a cumulative score across 3 initiatives. Meridian Loop, the strategy memo, and a third project I had nearly forgotten because it predated our relationship entirely. Adrian read that date, then the score beside it, and went very still. The shares he thought I had gained by standing next to him had started accumulating while I was still trying to get my work noticed by people who didn't even know I was sleeping alone. The consequence arrived before we even left the conference room. The HR representative closed the contribution file, folded her hands, and said, until compliance finishes the independence review, Noah will be temporarily removed from any compensation-linked strategy approvals. I stared at her, removed from my own work. Only decisions that could affect equity allocation or performance pools. It's a conflict control measure, not disciplinary action. The distinction sounded clean on paper. In practice, it meant I would be excluded from 2 projects I had spent months building because returning shares had forced the company to ask whether I deserved to receive them in the first place. Adrian's chair shifted beside me. That restriction is unnecessary. Adrian. He looked at me, then stopped. I could almost see the old reflex moving through him. Challenge the policy, call legal, make the obstacle disappear before it could touch me. Instead, he turned back to HR. What would remove the restriction? A clean finding that the awards were generated independently of your influence. Then complete the review. His voice was clipped, but he left it there. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. By the time I returned to my floor, the situation had already moved faster than the facts. My department head, Martin was waiting beside my office. "You've been taken off the Hamilton Review," he said. "Temporarily. I know. And legal wants us to preserve anything related to your performance awards." He hesitated. "There's also a question about how your work was credited in some executive reporting." That got my attention. "What question?" Martin shut the door and pulled up an old board presentation from the Cole Meridian loop, crossed its retention target. The slide credited the recovery to an executive strategic intervention led through the CEO Transformation Office. "I wasn't in the CEO Transformation Office," I said. "No, neither was my team. No, my memo sat in the appendix as supporting analysis while Adrian's office carried the headline credit. For years I had told myself credit did not matter as long as the work survived. Now the absence of my name made my contribution look dependent on his. Who wrote this? Executive Communications assembled the deck. Your director signed off. Adrian approved the packet. Of course he had. The door opened behind us before I could answer. Adrian stood there, one hand still on the frame. His gaze moved from Martin to the slide on my screen. "Leave us a minute." Martin looked at me instead of obeying automatically. That tiny hesitation mattered. "It's fine," I said. After he left, Adrian stepped closer to the monitor. He read the attribution line without speaking. "I approved this packet," he said finally. "You did. I didn't write that description." "I know." His head turned toward me. "That doesn't make it better." I hadn't expected him to say that. I leaned back against the desk. "Yesterday, you thought your name explained why I had shares. Today, your name is sitting on top of work that helped me earn them." The words hit harder than I intended. Adrian's expression tightened, but he didn't defend himself. "What do you want done?" There was the question again. Not an order. Not a solution already moving before I could stop it. "I want the record corrected," I said. "Not because I'm your partner. Because it's wrong." "Agreed. And you can't be the one who simply rewrites it." His jaw flexed. "Because that would look like I'm protecting you. Because then my work would still depend on your authority to become real." He was quiet for several seconds. "Then you correct it. Compliance has restricted me from the compensation-linked review. Not from authorship records." He picked up his phone, then paused. "I can request an independent attribution audit. No conclusions, no instructions. You submit documentation like everyone else. You'd stay out of it?" I'd recuse myself. For Adrian, that carried more weight than an apology. "Do it," I said. He made the request in front of me and copied compliance, HR, and Martin. No private call. No quiet favor. No executive phrasing designed to make the result obvious. When he finished, he set the phone down. "There's something else." He opened the expanded record for that third early initiative, an internal pricing framework from before Meridian Loop and before we started dating. I had written the original model as a junior strategist. My name was on the first submission. 3 layers later, it had become an executive initiative, with Adrian's digital approval at the top. He looked at the dates, then at me. "I signed off on this before I knew you." Apparently, he didn't move. The contradiction was becoming too clean to dismiss. My work had been reaching him long before I ever did, stripped of my name on the way up. And according to the preliminary audit note at the bottom of the file, those 3 initiatives had not merely qualified me for shares. Together, they had created the performance threshold that determined how much ownership I received. The preliminary audit changed everything because the third project had not simply helped me qualify for shares. It had helped determine the value of the pool those shares came from. The next morning, compliance sent the full attribution report. My 3 initiatives had pushed the company past the threshold that increased the employee ownership pool for that year. Then I reached the executive summary and stopped. The same performance gains had also increased the value of Adrian's own long-term compensation package. I read the numbers again. I had spent days proving my shares had not come from Adrian. Now the records showed something more uncomfortable. Some of the value he assumed flowed down from him had actually flowed up from work I helped create. He walked into my office 10 minutes later without an assistant, without legal, without the polished distance he usually carried into difficult conversations. "You saw it," he said. I turned the monitor toward him. Apparently, I wasn't the only one benefiting from my work. His eyes moved over the report. "Noah, I'm not accusing you of stealing anything." "I know. Do you?" He sat across from me instead of standing over the desk. That small choice registered. Because yesterday this was still about whether I got shares because I was dating you. Now the company is telling us those shares existed because my work created enough measurable value to trigger them. Adrian's gaze stayed on the screen. "And some of my compensation increased from the same performance." "Yes." The words sat between us with more weight than I expected. There was no fraud hiding in the records. Cole Meridian had measured my work accurately enough to reward it, while executive reporting kept making the value look as if it originated higher up. Adrian had seen the results without seeing the path that led to them, then filled the missing explanation with himself. He leaned back and rubbed a hand over his jaw. I thought proximity to me had changed your position here. It did. I watched his expression tighten. People started making assumptions faster. That isn't what I meant. I know. That's the problem. He looked at me then. Not angry, not defensive, just forced to stay inside a truth he could not reorganize. I thought I was the one giving you access, he said. You were giving me access. The admission landed quietly. What mattered was not whether I had secretly been more powerful than Adrian. I hadn't. What mattered was that his position had made it easy to mistake the direction of value. I didn't stay because I needed access, I said. I stayed because I thought you knew the difference. Adrian's face changed. That was the first time I had said anything close to the real wound out loud, and even then I stopped before giving him all of it. The old instinct was still there. Let the documents finish the argument. Let the dates and formulas say what I did not want to. He looked back at the report. Compliance cleared the first 2 awards. I saw. They're reviewing the later tranches only for process consistency, not favoritism. Good. And the attribution audit is being expanded. I frowned. Expanded how? They found the same reporting pattern in other projects. Work moving upward, names disappearing, executive offices receiving broad credit. This was no longer just about clearing me. The pattern was structural enough that fixing my record privately would prove almost nothing. Adrian reached the same conclusion. I can order corrections, he said. I waited. He caught himself. No, that would be the old answer. You're making progress. Painfully. He folded the report closed. Then tell me what the right answer is. I shook my head. That's still you asking me to solve it for you. He went quiet. The difference between us had shifted again. I no longer needed him to understand where the shares came from. We knew. They were earned through a system that had measured my contribution more honestly than either of us realized. The harder question was what Adrian would do now that the evidence had taken away every convenient explanation. My transfer was still moving forward. Compliance had no basis to block it. The shares were mine because I had earned them, and soon they would be gone because I had chosen to give them up. Adrian finally understood that he had never been the source of my value. What neither of us knew yet was whether learning that truth had come too late for him to remain part of my life. By the next afternoon, the company had cleared every equity award under review, and my transfer was approved to proceed. That should have ended the practical problem. Instead, it removed the last practical reason Adrian could use to keep me close. Compliance restored my access to compensation-linked strategy work, but the expanded attribution audit had already exposed a wider pattern. Executive communications had routinely consolidated project credit under senior leadership, especially when work crossed divisions. Nothing illegal had happened. That almost made it harder to fix. There was no single person to blame, just a system that rewarded visibility at the top and treated everyone below it like supporting detail. My own record was being corrected, but compliance recommended an independent review of several years of executive reporting. Adrian recused himself before anyone asked him to. I found out because the notice appeared in my inbox with everyone else's. He had also removed his office from the approval chain for any correction involving my work. I stared at the message longer than I needed to. 2 days earlier, he would have called 3 people before breakfast and made sure the result came out right. Now he was deliberately giving up the power to control it. At 5:30, he appeared outside my office carrying 2 coffees. Before you object, he said, I purchased these personally. There is no executive sponsorship. I looked at the cup he held out. Did legal approve the transaction? I considered requesting an opinion. That sounds healthy. The corner of his mouth moved. I'm told personal growth is unpleasant. It was the first time being around him had felt almost normal since dinner, which made the normality dangerous in its own way. I took the coffee. He had remembered exactly how I drank it. That small fact hurt less than it would have yesterday. Maybe because he wasn't asking for anything in return. The transfer goes final tomorrow, I said. Adrian nodded. He already knew. I won't interfere. I know. He leaned against the edge of the empty desk across from mine, but kept enough distance that I didn't feel cornered. For a while neither of us spoke. Then he said, There's something I owe you that isn't an explanation. I waited. His instinct to turn emotion into a quarterly presentation was visibly fighting for its life. I've spent most of my adult life assuming that if someone wanted access to me, there was a reason behind it. There usually is. You're a CEO. That's the part one used to make it sound rational. He looked down at his coffee. My father used to say everyone had a price. Employees, friends, partners. He treated generosity like an investment and loyalty like a return. Adrian's voice stayed controlled, but the control no longer felt like authority. It felt like effort. I thought I was smarter than that. I just changed the vocabulary. I said nothing. This was the first time he had given me the fear underneath the accusation instead of another argument built on top of it. When you stayed, he continued, some part of me kept asking what made staying worthwhile for you. The apartment. Access. My name. I convinced myself that identifying the benefit meant I couldn't be surprised later. So you protected yourself by deciding my motive before I could disappoint you. He winced once. Yes. That explains it. I set the coffee down. It doesn't excuse it. I know. No qualification followed. No polished sentence about context or intent. Just that. I realized I had been waiting for him to defend himself so I could keep defending myself. When he didn't, the conversation had nowhere familiar to go. I spent years assuming you knew what I contributed, I said. Not just here. With us. I thought if I showed up enough, if I was consistent enough, if I never asked you for anything I hadn't earned, you'd understand why I was there. Adrian looked at me. You shouldn't have had to prove it. Maybe not. But I also shouldn't have expected you to read evidence like it was a confession. That was harder to admit than anything in the audit. The documents had been easier. Documents didn't need courage. Adrian pushed away from the desk. The attribution review is going forward without me. Your record will be corrected whether you stay with the company, leave it, stay with me, or never speak to me again. The last part came out rougher than the rest. Why are you telling me that? Because I need you to know there isn't a condition attached. He pulled an envelope from inside his jacket and placed it on the desk instead of handing it to me. It was a signed recusal and authority waiver covering my compensation, role assignments, and any future employment decision involving me. He had voluntarily removed himself from decisions that could affect whether staying at Cole Meridian was easier for me. I read the final clause twice. This makes it harder for you to help me. Yes. And easier for me to leave. His eyes held mine. Yes. The transfer would be final in the morning. Now Adrian had removed his own authority from my career too. For the first time since we had started dating, there would be nothing structural tying me to him at all. And that meant the next decision would no longer be about proving why I had stayed. It would be about deciding whether, once I was completely free to go, there was anything between us worth choosing again. The transfer became final at 8:17 the next morning, and 43 minutes later the company sent me an offer to leave. It came from the board's governance committee, not Adrian. The letter was careful, expensive, and almost offensively reasonable. Compliance had found no favoritism in my equity awards, and the attribution audit had confirmed that my work had been consistently undercredited. Still, the committee believed my continued position inside Cole Meridian created an ongoing perception risk, while I remained personally involved with its CEO. They offered 6 months of salary, full benefits through the year, and a neutral public statement describing my departure as voluntary. I read it twice before noticing the final paragraph. If I declined, I could stay, but every promotion, compensation decision, and strategic assignment involving me would remain under independent board review for as long as Adrian and I were together. The company had finally admitted I earned my place, then built a fence around it because of who I loved. Martin found me 10 minutes later. You don't have to sign. I know. But this doesn't disappear if you stay. I know that too. The most frustrating part was that nobody had technically threatened me. Governance was doing exactly what institutions did when truth became inconvenient, converting a human problem into a risk category. By noon, word of the attribution corrections had started moving through senior leadership. People who had ignored my name for years suddenly knew exactly who I was. 2 directors sent congratulations that read like apologies written by committee. Another asked if I was comfortable with the visibility. I deleted that one. Adrian did not contact me. At first, that hurt. Then I understood why. The recusal he had signed meant he could not intervene in the governance decision without breaking the first promise he had made that actually cost him something. When he finally appeared near the end of the day, he stopped outside my office instead of walking in. Can I come in? I looked up from the separation offer. You're asking now? I'm trying to develop a pattern. There was almost enough dryness in it to make me smile. Almost. Come in. He saw the letter on my desk and went still. They sent it to you. This morning. His jaw tightened. I wasn't consulted. I know. I can challenge it. The answer came too quickly, and we both heard the old Adrian in it. He closed his eyes for half a second. No. Let me try that again. He pulled out the chair across from me, but waited until I nodded before sitting. You can challenge it. If you want counsel, I'll make sure the company covers independent representation, but I won't choose the lawyer and I won't speak to them. That sounds almost healthy. I hate it. This time I did smile, briefly. Then I pushed the letter toward him. If I stay, every major decision about my career gets treated like evidence. If I leave, people will say the board paid me to make the conflict disappear. Adrian read the page without touching it. Neither option is fair. No, and I helped create the conditions that made both possible. I studied him. He could have blamed governance. He could have argued that the board was overreacting. Instead, he let the consequence belong partly to him. There's another option, he said. I could ask the board to remove me from any oversight connected to your division permanently. You already removed yourself from my employment decisions. This would go further. I'd give up executive authority over the entire unit. I sat back. That division reports directly into your operating structure. I'm aware. It would weaken your control over one of the fastest growing areas in the company. Also aware. The old version of Adrian would have explained why the sacrifice was manageable, as if reducing its cost made it easier to accept. He didn't. Would it fix this? I asked. It might remove the governance conflict. And if the board refuses? His gaze met mine. Then you still get to decide what happens to your career. Even if that means leaving Cole Meridian? A pause. Yes. And leaving you? This time the pause lasted longer. Yes. He said it plainly, and something inside me gave way in the worst possible direction. For days I had wanted proof that Adrian could stop using power to hold the things he cared about. Now he was giving me exactly that proof, and all it did was make leaving harder for a reason I could no longer blame on him. The governance committee met before close of business. Adrian submitted the structural recusal proposal without recommending an outcome. They rejected it. Removing the CEO from an entire division, they decided, created more governance problems than it solved. The offer on my desk remained unchanged. Stay and live under permanent scrutiny. Leave and take my career somewhere Adrian's name could no longer explain it. At 6:15, I signed only the acknowledgement that I had received the offer. Nothing else. Adrian waited by the door while I shut down my computer. What are you going to do? He asked. For once, there was no strategy hiding behind the words. I don't know yet. I picked up my coat. But I know I'm not making the decision tonight because I'm angry. He nodded. That's fair. And I'm not making it because I'm afraid of losing you. Something moved across his face, but he accepted that too. We walked to the elevator together without touching. When the doors opened, Adrian stayed behind. He had spent the entire day proving he would let me go if that was what freedom required. The separation offer was in my bag. The shares were no longer mine, and his authority no longer controlled my future. For the first time, there was nothing left between us that could force me to stay. That meant the next thing I chose would finally tell both of us whether love had been there after everything else was removed. I declined the separation package the next morning, then submitted my resignation on my own terms. No payout. No negotiated statement. No condition tying my exit to Adrian or the board. Martin read the letter once and looked at me over the top of his monitor. You know they would have paid you to leave. That's exactly why I'm not taking it. By 10, governance had acknowledged my resignation and confirmed that the attribution corrections would remain part of the permanent company record. My work would keep my name whether I stayed at Cole Meridian or not. For the first time in days, the decision in front of me had nothing to do with shares, compensation, or corporate policy. I texted Adrian one sentence. I need to talk to you somewhere you're not my CEO. He sent an address 20 seconds later. It was the small neighborhood restaurant where we had eaten on our third date, before anyone photographed us together, before invitations started arriving because of his last name. Adrian was already there when I walked in. No suit jacket. No assistant waiting nearby. He stood when he saw me, then stopped himself from pulling out my chair. You resigned. I did. His face tightened. Because of the board? Because I decided I don't want my career measured through our relationship anymore. He absorbed that without trying to argue. I'm sorry. That's not why I asked you here. I put my resignation acknowledgement on the table between us, beside the confirmation that the share transfer had closed. 2 documents. 2 choices nobody had forced me to make. Adrian looked at them, then at me. I don't want anything from you tonight, I said. No job. No shares. No apartment. No introduction. No protection. His breathing changed slightly, but he stayed quiet. I need you to understand what actually broke this. I had spent a week letting records speak for me because records were clean. Feelings were not. It wasn't that you thought I benefited from being with you. Of course I did. You benefited from being with me too. That's what relationships are supposed to do. Adrian lowered his eyes for a second. The problem was that you used those benefits to explain me. He looked back up. I continued before I could retreat into facts again. I stayed when you worked until 2 in the morning. I stayed when your board hated half your decisions, and you came home pretending it didn't matter. I stayed when you were impossible to talk to because every feeling had to become a risk assessment before you could admit you had won. Something almost like pain crossed his face. I did not soften the truth. And when you finally tried to explain why I was still there, you chose your name. Not me. Adrian sat very still. I was afraid. I know. That doesn't make what I did acceptable. No, he nodded once. No defense. No speech about his father. No explanation polished enough to sound like accountability. I treated your love like something I could audit, he said. And when I couldn't understand why you stayed, I assumed the answer had to be something I controlled. The simplicity of it hurt more than any elaborate apology could have. Yes. Adrian looked at the resignation letter. What happens now? That was the old question, but he asked it differently. There was no plan hidden inside it. I finally understood that the power between us had changed because he was willing to hear an answer he could not manage. I leave Cole Meridian. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. And us. Silence held for a moment. This was the choice I had been avoiding by turning everything else into a problem I could solve first. The shares were gone. The job was gone. Adrian had removed himself from my career, defended my record without claiming me, and accepted every consequence of letting me walk away. I no longer needed to prove that I could leave. I already had. I'm not staying with you, I said. His face went pale, but I kept going. Not the way we were. He looked at me carefully. What does that mean? It means if we try again, you don't get to assume why I'm here. You ask. You don't fix my life because uncertainty makes you uncomfortable. You offer, and you let me say no. Adrian's eyes did not leave mine. And you? That was fair. I stop expecting you to understand things I refuse to say. I tell you when I'm hurt before I turn it into evidence. Something in his expression loosened. Not relief yet. He had learned enough not to assume. Are you saying you want to try? I looked at the 2 documents between us. My shares were no longer mine. By the end of the month, neither was my office. Nothing material remained that could explain the answer for either of us. Yes, I said, but I'm choosing you after leaving everything else. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, there was no CEO voice waiting for me. Then I'll spend as long as it takes making sure you never have to prove why again. I shook my head. Don't promise that. He stopped. Ask me. Adrian took a breath. Will you let me try? This time, the answer belonged entirely to me. Yes. The resignation still stood. The transfer still stood. Nothing went back to the way it had been. That was the reason I finally believed something between us could move forward. 3 weeks after I left Cole Meridian, the share transfer confirmation was still sitting in a folder on my kitchen table, but for the first time I could look at it without feeling like it was evidence in a trial. My resignation had gone through exactly as I filed it. No separation payment. No special consulting arrangement. The attribution audit continued after I left, and the corrected project records now listed my work under my name, along with the teams who had actually built it. Adrian stayed out of the process. The final notice recorded his recusal. He had said nothing would be conditional on whether I chose him, then lived that promise when nobody was watching. We were trying again slowly enough that the word trying meant something. Adrian no longer assumed that seeing me on Thursday meant he also had Friday. He asked. Sometimes I said yes. Once I said no because I wanted an evening alone, and instead of appearing at my door with dinner and a solution to a problem I had never presented, he sent one message. Understood. Hope you get some rest. When I told him later that it sounded like HR approving personal leave, he looked offended. I was being emotionally appropriate. You're improving incrementally. That was my line. The humor felt different now. Before, I had used it to puncture his control before it could close around me. Now it was just ours again. He came over that Sunday carrying coffee and stopped when he saw the folder on the table. He didn't touch it. Is that the final transfer? Yes. Do you want to talk about it? Not can I fix it? Not why is it still here? Just an offer. I opened the folder and slid the confirmation across the table. My ownership balance was 0. The units had returned to the plan under the surrender provision exactly as authorized. No cash had come back to me. No replacement shares. Transfer complete. Irrevocable. I thought returning these would prove something to you, I said. Adrian sat across from me. They did. Not the part that mattered. He waited. A month earlier, I would have pointed at the dates and trusted the evidence to assemble my feelings for me. I didn't do that anymore. What mattered was that I needed you to see me without making me build a case first. His face went still, but not guarded. I know. And I needed to stop believing that loving someone meant they should understand everything I refused to say. Adrian glanced at the document. May I? Yes. He picked it up and read the final line. His thumb rested near my signature. I could have offered to replace them, he said. I know. I thought about it. I know that too. A faint smile appeared. You know me very well for someone who keeps insisting I should ask more questions. Knowing you isn't the same as deciding for you. The words landed. He set the paper down. Then I'll ask, do you regret giving them up? I considered it. Financially? A little. I'm not an idiot. He laughed softly. Emotionally? No. They removed every excuse we had for confusing dependence with love. Adrian nodded. And leaving the company? I'm still figuring out what comes next. Do you want help? The question came cleanly, without an offer already attached. Maybe later. All right. No persuasion. No resources quietly deployed. Just acceptance. I reached across the table and rested my hand over his because I wanted to. Adrian turned his hand beneath mine slowly enough to let me change my mind. I didn't. Dinner Thursday? He asked. That sounds suspiciously like a personal invitation. I can draft a formal request if necessary. There he is. He smiled. The shares stayed gone. My resignation stayed final. My name stood on my work without his beside it, and neither of us needed the old evidence anymore. When he asked again about Thursday, there was no title behind the question, no company, no apartment, no advantage I needed to protect. Just Adrian, waiting for an answer he knew belonged to me. Yes, I said. And for once, there was nothing left to prove why.